Hi, I hope everyone's doing okay. So what I'm going to show you right now is the observational logbook, which is the assignment that follows your research proposal. So the idea is that by this point, you already have a solid sense of what you're doing for your observation, for your experiment. So now I just want to show you the details of the assignment. And just as a reminder, it's going to be due at the end of the day on Sunday, the 22nd. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, opening the assignment now. All right, here you go. So basic information, as you can see here, your observational logbook is going to be at least 1,200 words, right? It's going to be an APA style once again. If you need a refresher on what that looks like, there's a link there for the title page. Remember that for APA 7, the student papers look different than professional papers, so just keep that in mind. And once again, the reminder about the due date. So the actual assignment. So for the assignment, you're going to conduct the study or experiment that you proposed for the previous assignment, and this means that you're going to be collecting at least 5 days worth of data / observations. The one thing to keep in mind, as we keep saying in class, right, is that for your observations, you're going to have photographic evidence, right, of some sort, because otherwise your reader will not be able to verify that the claims you're making are true. So what are you going to be doing for each day of observation? Here we go. So for each day, you're going to collect photographic evidence of your observations. You're going to be writing a description of your object of study and its status. You're also going to be speculating on the significance of your observations for that day. You're also going to be generating questions for the next day's observation and or future research. So the idea here is that you should be working on the logbook as you go along, right? Don't let this all pile up. This is especially important because once the 5 days pass and you have all this data, it's going to be very confusing and convoluted to try to separate each day. So instead of doing that to make your job easier, you should be writing this as you go along. So for each day, you're describing what you're seeing. Remember to be as objective, as clear, as formal as possible, right? And then you're speculating, hey, this is what I saw today. Why do I think this is happening? What's going to happen tomorrow, right? And just as a refresher, this is what we were doing last week, right, with the observation activity with the monkeys. Right, so you're going to be doing that for each day of your observations. Then at the end of the 5 days, you're going to be able to address the following questions. So what did I learn about my object of study? What claims can I now make regarding my object of study? And then what evidence could I use from my observation logbook to support these claims? Right, so these aren't questions that you're going to be answering per se, they're just considerations. However, at the end of your logbook, you are going to be writing a short narrative. So this is at least 2 pages that includes the following sections. So description and speculation. So I don't want you to get confused here. Essentially, you're doing description speculation for each day of observation, and then at the end, you're doing a broader description and speculation section that's going to cover the 5 days. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is what you should be doing just as a reminder, with, going over the difference between description and speculation. So for the description section, you're describing what you're seeing using specific details, right? So this is where you bring in all your detail. If you want to be as objective as possible, once again, so bring in your measurements. If you're describing color, use the Pantone color chart or something similar so that your reader has a basis for what you're observing, right? And the biggest and most important thing, right? That in this section you should refrain from explaining how or why something is happening or speculating about behavior in this section. Remember, that's not the place for that kind of analysis, right? Instead, you're simply writing the observations that are most important to give a clear picture of what you studied and how you studied it, right? Another reminder here to use specific measurements. And then in the speculation section, that's where you analyze, right? This is where you posit why certain behaviors emerge in your object of study. So for example, you might begin by deciding which behavior surprised you most or seem most interesting to you. And this is what happens in research, right? Even though these aren't rigorous projects, you might go in with a certain idea. Oh, I think I know what's going to happen. The bananas are going to look a certain way. And then you make your observations and what you see contradicts or doesn't follow along the lines of what you thought was going to happen, and that's fine, right? Your job as a researcher is just to faithfully report on what you're seeing, even if nothing is happening, right? Or nothing visible is happening. And as I mentioned before, you should also use the speculation section as a place to begin thinking about future questions that could be explored as a follow-up to your observations, right? So at the very end, you can say, hey, this is what happened today based on this. Here's what's going to happen tomorrow. You can also say, hey, I wonder why this happened or that happened, right? Next, I want to go over a more detailed outline for the observational logbook, right? So this is reviewing some of the things that I've mentioned already. So you're going to start with a student APA style cover page. You're going to have an introduction. In the introduction, you're going to state the purpose of the study. You're going to outline your observational protocol and state the methods of data collection, once again using specific details, and you're going to establish your hypothesis. So if you think about it, this is essentially a lot of the information that was in the method section of your proposal. So you are definitely allowed to revise, clean that up, and use it in the introduction here, right? So based on whatever feedback your instructor gave you, that's what you would be doing there. And then for each daily entry, you want to keep track of each day's observations. So for those purposes, you're going to include a heading for each entry. That's going to include the date and time of observation. Remember, you want to be as consistent as possible in terms of the times in which you are observing something, right? Otherwise, it's going to affect the validity of your data. It says it right there, right? For each daily entry, you're going to write a report on your systematic and objective observations. We already talked about that, right? So for each day, you're going to have a description paragraph. You should label it as such. And then you're going to have your speculation section in a separate paragraph. You should also be labeling it as such, right? And then you should begin or end. In terms of my preferences, I think it makes more sense to end each entry with the evidence for that day's observations, right? And as you go along, but definitely by the end of all this, you should be organizing your data in tables, charts, graphs, whatever is relevant, right? We can talk about that more later on. And then the narrative, right? So as I was saying earlier, this is going to be at the end of your 5-day observation. So 2-page minimum narrative where you are going over everything that you've observed. So it's going to have, once again, a description section and a speculation section. So the description section, you're providing a summary of the 5 days, not just one day, right? So you don't have to repeat, and you shouldn't just kind of copy paste, regurgitate what you had already written. Instead, do a broader summary, right, of the 5 days. And once again, try to be specific but objective in your description. Do not explain anything or speculate on anything. Don't analyze. That's not the place for that, right? And in order to summarize your observations, you should include a graph, a table, a comparative image at the beginning and end of the section that summarizes your 5 days of data observation, right? And then in the speculation section of the narrative, that's really where all your analysis is going to come in. So this is very important, right? Here you're going to restate your initial hypothesis. Here's what I thought was going to happen at the beginning. Then you're going to evaluate that hypothesis. Was it confirmed? Was it not confirmed by your observations? And then in your analysis, you're going to explain why your hypothesis was confirmed or rejected, right? And then the final part that's very important here in the speculation section, you're also going to suggest directions for future research, right? In other words, think of it in this way. If I were to ask you at the end of the 5 days, if you had 5 more days or 10 more days, whatever the case may be, to continue this experiment, or if you were to run it again, what would you do differently, right? So that gives you a chance to explain what you think happened, how you could design a stronger or more sound experiment, how you might want to adjust it if you want to observe different variables, for example, right? Whatever you decide to do, you have the option of doing that at the end of the speculation section for the 5-day narrative, right? I'm going to pause here for a moment. Think about any questions you might have, right? Obviously, we're not in person, but if you have any questions at this point, you can post them in the discussion board. You can contact your instructor, right? Okay, moving on. This is the rubric. Here's what we're going to be looking at when we're assessing your logbook. And then just a reminder, you want to make sure that you're meeting the minimum requirements. So that includes the word count. That includes having 5 days worth of observation, having images for each of those 5 days that provide evidence for your observations, right? So I think I'm going to stop it here. Once again, if you have any questions, let us know. Thanks, and take care.